Good evening, everyone. We are so glad to have you with us this evening. This is Leadership Conversations coming back to you once again. This month, we are talking about gender talk. What do we really mean about gender talk? So, while you're coming on in, we want to welcome you. We hope you had a great day. This is Thursday, it's my Friday. Yay! So, I'm really excited about that because that means I really had a really short week with Monday being off and then being able to be off tomorrow. So come on in, join us this evening as we talk about gender talk, which really is around communication, how we all can communicate better so we can get more things done, better products, better services. We can reach more market share. We can reach more people who we are intended to reach and not fighting each other inside, but we're really cohesive, collaborating, and doing some great things together. I am happy to introduce you to our guests. We have two guests here with us this evening. We're so excited. I asked these two gentlemen to join us. So we're going to ask them to introduce themselves and then we will go around with the host that we normally have and just remind you of who we are and what we do. So we're going to start with Pastor G. Eugene Taylor. You're on mute.
To everyone, good evening. I am Pastor G for Garland, Eugene Taylor, Senior Pastor at Agape Fellowship Ministry in East Hartford that myself and my wife founded uh, approximately 32 years ago. And not only that, but I am a husband for 39 going on 40 years. I have two beautiful daughters, two grandchildren, and more than anything, I love the Lord and I love the people of God, and I love being able to interact to help people navigate through their storms of life and being able to, as I help them, it helps me. And so I'm honored to be to be on tonight with Yvette and Edwina and David, and as well as Jesus, to be a part of this wonderful panel. And we pray that whatever information we give and share tonight, there would also be inspiration, and that we may be able to glean and get things that would help us better our communication with each other. So thank you very much for having me this evening.
You're very, very welcome. We're so glad to have you here. And Pastor Jesus.
Hey y'all, my name is Pastor Jesus. Yeah, I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts. I am the pastor of parachurch ministry called Ascend International. We were founded about, I think it's 2.5 years ago now, where we're serving different areas in the Massachusetts area, the New England area, and also in the Caribbean, where we're ministering, sharing the word of the Lord, and equipping the saints to do the same thing, to make disciples that make disciples. So I'm 27, married. I have been married for like, I think it's 5 years this year. It's crazy. So I reflect and think, Pastor Eugene, it's like 40 something years. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to get there. I will get there. So I'm like super excited to get to share with all four of you today. And I love to teach. I'm a teacher by trade, and the Lord has truly blessed myself and my wife as we're both teachers in the Springfield school system here in Massachusetts, and we truly love what we do. We love the next generation, and we love to talk to people, adults, fathers, mothers, and young folks about communication skills and how to share their experiences and their love for each other and the love for the Lord. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. So we're going to jump over to who normally is here with us always. So David and then Edwina.
So, hi, folks. David Gallagher, and I have a business called Leadership by Design. I've worked in a variety of different human resource roles for 30 years. I also, prior to that, worked with patients directly in locked psychiatric facilities, which was very rewarding, but also taught me just like the mental health hotline I worked on in college, taught me the importance of listening, which I think we could all do a lot more of in corporate America, not just corporate America, but just generally listening and then listening intently. So happy to be with everybody and welcome to our guests.
And Edwina, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Edwina Cogdell. I worked in um, corporate America for about 35 years. And so right now I'm a diversity and inclusion practitioner. And I'm also half of Destiny Speak. So I'm really happy about this discussion today because we know that everything starts with communication.
Awesome. So we're glad to have everyone here. And if you have been scrolling across our pages or you've stumbled across our YouTube page, I am Yvette C. Owens. I'm the other half of Destiny Speak. I get the pleasure of working with Edwina, and we've worked in various capacities together throughout our career, and we've come together to really help leaders specifically to create a culture where their people can thrive. And so we've talked a lot about corporate and we've talked a lot about businesses, and today you can see that we have two pastors on because we also remind you that corporate to us is when you ever have people coming together to achieve a vision together, because many of the same principles and the practices have to cross and they have to be employed the same way. So leaders are leaders and they should be taught how to really serve well, transform not only the organizations that they're in, but also transform the people that they're working with. And that's what we do with Destiny Speaks. So let's jump in, everyone. Let's jump in. If you are joining, please share this. Please invite others to the conversation because I'm sure they will really glean from it, because we're going to get into how we are communicating and how we can better communicate with one another and what's the differences in gender. So let's jump into the conversation. Let's have some great fun tonight. So let's put up there first and foremost. Let me put out there the first question. Hey, I'm a woman, you're a man. I was born this way. Shouldn't we talk different? Isn't my conversation or my communication very different than yours? And should I have to do something different than what I am? Does it depend on gender? Any of our guests can jump in and answer that.
All right. Well, I don't think, unfortunately, gender has played a major role in what's heard. Um, Oftentimes, we hear, but we don't hear. Um, I call that sometimes selective hearing, and based upon who is communicating. One thing that's critical, as Jesus said, he would like to get to where I am, but I remember when I was 5 years at married, and next year it'll be 40. But I think in our communication, what has helped us in our marriage is that we started as friends. We were dating from high school, teenagers, and I think when we developed our friendship first, even though after going on almost 40 years, we still have our highs and lows with our communication. Um, and I was reading some information, and I was kind of laughing. I was kind of laughing because some of the information I was reading, I saw myself. Um, I'll say that now, but when I was sharing with my wife and my daughter, I would never admit that. But I was like, wow, that's me. I'm kind of like that. I'm kind of silent, and I listen and I process before I speak. And sometimes my wife will speak, not that she gets it wrong, but she will speak, and sometimes she sometimes she'll regret it because like I wish I hadn't said that. She's more spontaneous, and I'm slow to speak. And I think it's because as I was reading this some literature, I process before I speak. I try to make it a habit not to come back and have to say I'm sorry or I made a mistake or an error. And sometimes in that slowfulness, it will seem like I'm not understanding or I'm not getting it as a male, but I really take time to process what I'm hearing before I respond. So unfortunately, sometimes the spontaneity of a woman can be a downfall, and sometimes the slowfulness of a man's response can be a downfall. So in our marriage, we try to find strengths and encourage and build each other up on where we have our strengths. And a lot of times, I'll say to my wife, I indirectly in my head, I'm like, I hope she says something. you know, I, I'm like, go ahead, get him, because she can come back with some words, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, and so I'm like, you didn't say anything. But anyways, we have fun, and I think that's important too. With your communication, you have fun with it.
Yeah.
Too often we make our communication business, business, and so structured and so in a box that we forget that our communication we should also have fun.
Yeah, that's good. I like where you started out. It's like it's really how it's kind of like how your personality, right? And because I know, and I was sharing this with David before we joined, I really am more prone and follow those traits that people want to put on men. I'm like to the bottom line. I want to get to the bottom line. I don't want to, I have less tolerance, for, I can engage in a conversation, but I'm like, okay, what's the bottom line? Let's get to it, and so we can move on. And that's because I'm more of an achiever type, driven type person. So I want to get to where we're going.
Right.
So I've found even in the workplace, there's some men who like to talk, and they talk and talk and talk. So you can't pigeonhole. I'm not finding that I can find a necessary trend. It really depends on personality, right? And so if we can really appreciate a person's tendency to communicate, then we can be more inclusive in those kind of things and receive more from each other, as opposed to coming in with those biases of a woman will speak this way and a man will speak that way, or receive information that way. Um, Jesus, Pastor Jesus, what would your thoughts be around that?
I think I want to kind of focus on the difference between like the male voice and the female voice,
Sure.
because we have to take into account our different types, our uniqueness in our voices and in who we are as people.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm hearing the conversation with Pastor Eugene, on how they communicate within their marriage, my marriage is kind of similar, but it's unique for me as a man. I have to learn to be quick to listen, right? And listen to the voice of my wife and recognize the voice of my wife when there's some of the inflections, right? When she's trying to emphasize certain things. It's imperative for us, even in the corporate world, to be able to recognize, the uniqueness and the voice of, each other, of men and women, because we all have something to contribute, and we have to both men and women, we have to learn to listen. I am the type of person that if you give me a section or a microphone, I will talk to you for like an hour and a half and then some, and then probably do a visual and keep talking. So it's like if we have to build that trust and that communication, trust between each other, when we can say, "Hey, you're talking a lot," and "Hey, I value what you have to say. You're very unique. I love the difference of like opinions or thoughts, but." Being able to kind of bring us all together into like one common goal, and that's as leaders and as people, as marriages, as husbands, as pastors, as leaders, we have to be able to distinguish the differentiate the different types of voice and the different types of uniqueness that every person carries, especially in marriage, like learning from my wife, and honor that and be able to kind of like, you know, how do you say, honor each other's voice, if that makes sense. In that way, we can have a space where it's safe, where a man and a woman can communicate effectively, but with that same respect and trust, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And I love the way you both have in your marriages found a way to serve each other from a communication standpoint and support each other. Because then you found your groove, you found that momentum between the two of you and how you can best support one another again. you know your style, she knows your style, and you guys work it, right? And that's awesome. David or Iwina, do you have
Well,
something to add around that? Go ahead.
Well, I would say, it's interesting. Marriages, they work a certain way, but when you get into the business environment, very different. You don't have that intimacy that occurs between a husband and wife. So I was thinking about one of the comments that you brought up, Yvette, around getting to the bottom line and let's get this done and that type of stuff. And a lot of times that can be perceived as being aggressive when it comes from a female, that type
Mm-hmm.
of communication style, where if it was a man, something scared me, right? um, where if it was a man, that would be celebrated,
Right.
right? And so that's some of the gender differences that I see. It's almost expected because we're women, we're expected to be nurturers, make everyone feel better about themselves and that type of thing. But in the boardroom, if you're something different, sometimes that can come across very negatively. So I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, David.
Yes, and I like what several of you talked about as far as um, whether you fit the stereotypical mold of certain gender talk or not. And that's because we've all seen the studies, from 20, 30, and 40, 50 years ago. We've seen videos, and they talk about things as though they're either this or they're that. And you can't peg human beings that way. There are too many factors that enter all of our lives with whether it's just a situation that we're in, how we were brought up, what our backgrounds are, etc., what we were taught growing up, and so forth. And I've seen as many, well, like Yvette said, I've seen as many women behave the way she does as I see men. And same thing with how much somebody's talking in a particular meeting. I know the stereotype is, oh, men will talk louder and more, and women will sit back and listen. I have seen that happen. I've also seen it happen in the reverse. I've also seen it happen where, and we should probably do this towards the end about, well, what do you do to fix that? And it was, okay, well, I haven't heard from you, and I don't care whether you're, what gender you identify with. I haven't heard from you. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? Let me hear it, because I know you're thinking something. Because I've seen all kinds of people's senior levels, junior levels, different genders. I know because we're talking about gender today tonight. That sit there and they're quiet for the whole meeting. Well, you must be thinking something. What is it?
Right.
Let me pull you out.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're talking about gender style. Did someone else want to jump in? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in terms of what was stated, you had mentioned something earlier, and I think an individual's personality
Hmm.
is very transparent in their communication style.
Hmm.
It doesn't make it good or bad if that's their personality. Some people are more aggressive than others, but yet the one that's passive can be just as effective as the one who's
Absolutely.
aggressive. So
Hmm.
it all depends on your personality, what you and a lot of our personalities have been shaped not only by culture but by our family dynamics.
Hmm.
What was brought to the table. Some women today had to be strong because their mothers had to be strong, so they became strong women. Some men had to be strong because of an absence of a father in their home. So I think the historical view of the family is very critical in how it has shaped and defined our communication skill with each other. And I think, you know, we can switch. It's not a boardroom per se, but when you pastor a church, um, there are some churches where the pastor is it, final say. And my wife founded the ministry with me, so she's co-pastor. So I have to had to uh, digress a little bit and say she's at the table with me and not
Hmm.
under me.
Hmm.
And even when you look at the Bible in marriage, it says the two shall become one. So you leave mother and father, the two twain together, and they become one flesh. And so in that, there should be a area of commonality that exists, and not this hierarchy, because sometimes there are churches now where the women are the pastors, yet their husbands are the heads of the home. So it all depends on your dynamic and how you're able to make your adjustment in your environment so that it works for you and works for you. I think that's
Awesome.
very important.
Awesome. Let's put this in context of a project, right? Because whether I'm in corporate or um, I'm in a church, whether I'm in the community, as a leader, how do I make sure that I'm bringing the voices to the table? Because you need collaboration. We need to make sure that we're hearing from everybody, as David said. So, even when you consider the gender, how do you make sure that there's equal voice at the table?
I think I can jump on this one. So for me personally, I talk to my team a lot and create intentional space for the voices to be heard. I think it'll be foolish of me as a leader or as a pastor or as a business owner to always be the one with the final say, as Pastor Eugene was saying, that when he has decisions or he works together collaboratively with his wife as co-founders and co-pastors. But I think also in corporate world, or when we're talking about a project, we need to be intentional in creating that space, that I call them awkward spaces, where either a, let's say, a woman or a gentleman wants to speak, we hear them out, and then we can assess, our need based on what they have shared, or what their passion is, what their personality
Mm-hmm.
portrays. I think it's imperative for us to do that, because it creates a safe work environment, and the environment continues to flourish when there is those spaces where our voices are heard. Perhaps my idea may not be adopted this time around, but I was heard. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's intentional, and that's one way that we can potentially, work to create a better and foster a good relationship between the genders when it comes to communication.
That's awesome.
Well,
That's
I think
awesome.
Pastor Jesus brings up a good point as far as like bringing the word, allowing all the voices to be heard. Because, there's been plenty of studies that have shown where women are sharing and they get cut off a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times by men. Those little micro inequities that people put out there that says to somebody, what you have to say isn't as important, so we're going to cut you off. And then there's been studies that have shown as well where, a woman will bring something up and it's not accepted, and then the next thing you know, a man comes with maybe a different spin, but it's basically the same thing, and it's accepted. Great idea. And the female is thinking, I said that 10 minutes ago.
Exactly.
So we definitely have to, and I think it goes back to, I have on my notes, listening, how important it is. Active listening, in the sense that really, really, and listening can look very different from a male versus a female. A female almost, I'll speak for me. From my perspective, if you're listening to me, that means I have your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You're rewarding me with your eyes. You're paying attention to what I'm saying. Maybe you're doing some paraphrasing, where, you can talk to men sometimes and you think they're not listening because they're not giving you the eyes, or they're doing something else at the same time, multitasking. So, to me, it just depends. Going back to what Pastor Eugene talked about, the personality of the person, and looking at what that individual needs. So if I need that eye contact and that even as my leader, then give that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Edwina, just so you know, in case you looked at the screen and saw me looking down, it's because I was looking at your image, not the camera. Um, and there are times where in my career where there's been an informational meeting coming up, and I've said to I wasn't focused on gender, men or women, but it was ahead of the meeting. What do you think about this topic? What's in your head? Oh, let's okay. Let me listen to that. Okay, and then I would pay attention during the meeting. Okay, you didn't bring it up. And I would say, you know, Jesus or Edwina, you made a good point to me the other day. How about you talk about that? But because who knows what reason, and maybe shame on me for kind of calling some people out occasionally, but because who knows why they wanted to be quiet, but it was a good idea or good comment or good perspective. Bring it up. Let everybody hear that. And likewise, after that same conversation, to say, like a couple of you mentioned about uh, uh, space. So some time passes. Okay, now what have you thought about that? What in what in hindsight would do you have as far as comments about that particular situation we were talking about? So.
Yeah, I want to just thank everybody who's watching in. I am monitoring the chat. Robin Taylor says that definitely happened to me in reference to what Edwina was sharing. She said, and when I addressed it, I was told after the meeting by a female that I shouldn't have said that. So she was in a situation where Edwina was describing where you know, she says something, then a male says it 2 minutes later, and now it's the best thing since sliced bread. And she addressed it, and she was told not to do it. So that leads me to the next question I was going to ask. How can we be better allies for those whose voices aren't being received at the table?
Well, let me just say this. I just want to add this into what was already stated and some information that I was going over. Historically, it says to a woman, good listening skills includes making eye contact. And again, we're trying to be gender neutral, but a lot of times we listen, you know, and we start processing, and not all the time are for men are they always given contact, but for a woman, as Awena said, give me your eyes, and I know I have your attention. So they look for that visual response, and a lack of eye contact often means that you're not valuing their input, and so it's not always intentional. I believe we're hearing, but we also begin to process things. And, whether it's multitasking, the brain gets going. How can I do this? I'm hearing you and everything. But everybody reacts in their communication style differently. And so I think very critical, because when we have sessions with couples, one of the key things people always talking about, in marriages, the finances, but finances is like maybe the fourth or fifth thing that we talk about. One of the first things we talk about is communication. There's this, I'm going to bring just a little scripture in, but there is a scripture that says, "In all thy getting, get understanding." And I believe that you have to give that person space to, I won't use the word unload, but to share their complete thought. Uh, and sometimes, as men, we have a tendency to be presumptive in what they're going to say, and we run with it. And sometimes even always say, "Well, that's not what I was going to say," and we've already attached the end before we've given them time to conclude. And so we do need to make sure that as we listen, that we get understanding. I don't have a problem asking you to repeat it, because sometimes what I've found out is that women have 5 tones that they use when they're speaking. Men usually have about 3 tones. And so we seem to be monotone, and we come straight at it, and we have that low voice that seems to demand respect. And the women, they fluctuate. And it seems like in their emotions, sometimes even the husband and wife, like, "Well, why are you yelling at me? I'm not yelling. You said you didn't hear me," but their voice raises up another level. And so I think that the very critical thing, that if you want to really get understanding of the whatever we're communicating, listen. And that's and before you start processing, listen completely to the end, and then you could begin to process. And I think it's something for men that we all have to learn, because we all um, base our conclusion on incomplete information.
Yeah, so here's another question for you all, the group. Can we learn to change and adapt our style? And the follow up to that is, should we?
I guess it depends on what it is. I mean, we can all learn if we have the capacity, the desire to learn. And when you say should we, is it going to make a better business relationship? Is it going to make it a better personal relationship? If it's going to make things better, then I'm open to changing. I mean, we should be leaders, because this is leadership conversations, should always be about improving and learning and growing and developing. So if I'm doing something that's driving someone nuts, I appreciate it when they tell me,
Right.
and then I can make adjustments. So I guess it depends on the situation. If we're talking about a female in a male dominated field, that could be really hard,
Right.
even to not make those adjustments.
Hmm.
Otherwise, how are you going to be successful there?
And in that case, who's making the adjustment, though?
Exactly.
That's good. Anybody else have an opinion on that?
Well, I have always a lot of opinions, but I think from a male perspective, if men would be less intimidated by strong women when they make contributions, I think we can advance, and we can squash some of the gender stifling. I think, yeah, it's a man's world, so they say, but I think also um, men are intimidated by strong women. Now, where that comes from, I don't know, but we have to be willing to. Like I said, sometimes my wife, who is a um, she social analyzes me sometimes, because she is a therapist. She has her own practice, and sometimes I tell her, lower the antenna. Right now, you're my wife. I don't need you to be reading me on everything. But again, I admire her strength, because she brings things to the table. Even when we have sessions, I like to give her a voice to say, because she puts a therapist uh, viewpoint on everything, where I'm just coming right at it from a biblical perspective or from a personal. She then attaches the clinical aspect to it. So I think that's what makes I feel our sessions more complete and more rounded, when she can address a clinical dynamic, and I admire that strength in her. So I think when we can admire the strength in women and not feel intimidated or cloud them out because I'm the man, I think we can the races, the genders would be a lot better working together.
Awesome. Anybody else want to address that?
Pastor G, your wife just sent me a text, and she said she's right outside listening to everything you're saying, and she disagrees completely, but uh, that's another story. But so
she
I was,
did. She did on the feed though. David laugh. She said, "Ha
oh,
ha."
um, hello. Um, so I was going to answer your question, Yvette, by saying yes and yes. Should we always try to learn? Yes. Should we always try to learn to put things in context if it's going to help us? And to Edwina's point, if we find ourselves in a culture that, okay, I'm not going to be able to change this culture by myself, then the question becomes more inward. Is this going to be a place that I can be successful or not? And if I feel like I can't, then maybe I should look for a culture where I think I can be successful and people are more open to me, my style, etc. But it's such a shame when because I'm old enough that I've seen a lot of it where people shut down other people just because of their style, um, or because they don't like somebody being candid, as an example, or or whatever, and they therefore, or they don't want people raising problems and being real, so they want to go the other direction. Uh, you've got to be open to that kind of thing. Um, and that's another thing I know I've seen in literature about men being, again, another stereotype, but traditionally men being more candid and direct in their communications versus a woman. Um, but I've also seen men and women, quite frankly, take the label of being candid as a license to be rude and disrespectful. And I remember a meeting where somebody, I won't give the gender away, but the person said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just being candid." And I wanted to say out loud, it was a big meeting, so I didn't. "Oh no, you're being rude. You're being disrespectful to everybody in this room."
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's not a license to be, because candor is actually being direct, but also being direct with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I know Jesus wants to jump in. I just want to show this comment as he's preparing his comments. Iris says, yes, we can all learn. We can learn and still make adjustments. The person who stops learning, yes, and yes, and yes. The person who stops learning as a leader can't teach others to make adjustments and growth. As a team, learning from each other, commitment has to be a part of the equation. I absolutely agree. We have to first be committed in what we're trying to achieve, and then let our communication and our ability and willingness to adjust to make sure we get there to be a part of that. And then after Jesus makes his comments, we have some comments in the feed that we're going to share.
Awesome. I just what Iris just shared on her comment. That was exactly what I was going to say. So I'm just gonna reserve my comments and my breath for the other questions sections.
Awesome, awesome. So Stacy Barber Bent says in the comments, cultural diversity plays a huge part. Communication is so varied. And then she followed up because I said, tell me more. This is interesting. And she said, most communicate from more than words. We validate communication from our perspective or culture. Does that make someone a great communicator because it meets our needs? Thoughts?
I
Does it
think
make
as a
us?
I
Go ahead.
think as a communicator, it's important that we able to integrate our conversation into all cultures. That would really validate you as a good communicator, um, to all genders, all races. Um, to be impactful, um, male or female, is you shared it. Um, like Pastor Jesus says, for the ministry, we're making disciples and teaching them how to make disciples and make disciples. So, in your communicating, what you're communicating, are you able to share it in a culture that's not yours, but can be received, so that seeds are being sown in that culture, and there's harvest that's going to come up in that culture, that's foreign to your own culture.
Yeah, I think she's agreeing with. She says not just how we communicate, but how we receive
Right.
communication. Yeah, so we have to listen with a very open mindset when people are talking. I've actually mentored some gentlemen in the workplace, some younger peers, who come and say, you know what, it feels like if I ask a question, people are being offended, and this is, people of color, right? So, and I mentor them, and they're like, if I ask the question, then everybody's being offended, and I'm being told I'm not being gentle enough, or things like that. And so it's like, okay, well, are you positioning yourself so that people can hear you, and find a way to speak the language that's in the room so people are open, right? And at the same time, those people across the table, can you be open to hear the person and not what your bias is through that. So and we talk about that when we are helping leaders to create a healthy culture through, and when we're dealing with those folks and we're helping leaders from a Destiny Speak perspective, we definitely make sure that people are open to, we all have biases. Let's just own up to that. Let's manage them so that they don't get in the way. Because if we just say, yep, I have biases and this is just how I am, you just shut everything down. So let's admit that. Any thoughts around that?
So I like your example, Yvette, as because what's interesting is how I would approach that same individual is okay. So tell me the context, tell me the conversation, what was happening, help me understand the situation, because you want to know the gravity of the conversation, the sensitivity of it, as well as what is your role compared to the other people in the room. Now tell me how you phrased your comment or you phrased your question, etc. And and then kind of go from there. And maybe there's some coaching that could be done, and maybe it's more the people, like Pastor G, who said maybe they just have an issue with a strong woman. Well, then perhaps they should. This is not the 1940s anymore,
Mm-hmm.
so so they should. Never mind. I won't make comments, but but it's not the 1940s anymore. So, but and I like that, quite frankly. It's helpful to understand the context of our conversations. Word choices, words mean everything. Every word matters, and the inflection in your voice matters as well. So
I, I
So go
think
ahead.
I think I also want to add to what you're saying is like 73 to about 90% of our communication is also like body language and what we do with our body, with our face. It's like how was your posture? Like how was your emotion? What were you expressing corporately that potentially could have risen like all these sorts of like, hey, or pushback. So we have to be mindful as leaders when we're listening to people and when we're speaking to people that our corporate body, like our body, is reflecting what we're trying to say rather than our own biases. If I talk to you and say you did a great job, it doesn't give you the same feeling. It's like, hey, you did a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the difference of our body language really communicates more than what we say with our words. So we have to be mindful of that, especially like in board meetings. Like I've been in meetings and it's been so intense, but the communication has been so fluid because the body language was more like relaxed and chill rather than like I'm gonna bring down the hammer on you and we're gonna like make sure nothing this never happens again. Conversations were tough, but again, the body language made the environment and the atmosphere so welcoming and so comfortable that the correction or the communication was produced effectively. So your body language speaks more than what you have to say.
That's great. Awesome, awesome,
And
awesome.
I was thinking, and thank you, Pastor Jesus, for bringing up the body language because that is huge. Your body language can commute a lot about how you're feeling about things. Like I don't have a poker face. Whatever I'm
Me
thinking is
either.
on my face, right? And for me, when Pastor Eugene talked about being a deep, thoughtful person and all this kind of stuff, I think out loud. And so, as a leader, I have to be really careful about that because that will move people into action. And I was like, why you do that? Well, you said that. That's not what I. So, I have to be really, really careful about that. I just don't think you can ignore the culture, though,
Mm.
of the environment that you're in. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is, I remember being in the ninth grade, and you know how in homeroom they sit you in alphabetical order. So my last name was Cline. So I'm sitting with all the C people who turned out to be a lot of athletes. So can you imagine what homeroom was like? They were talking about the games, they were talking about this, and I was just sitting there. So I went home to learn sports because I had two brothers. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm a lover of sports today. For me to be in that environment, I needed to understand the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't talking about nails
Right.
our boyfriends. They were talking sports, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be engaged. So I went and learned sports. And so that's what I mean by I think great leaders are able to adapt in different environments and know what's acceptable norms and that type of thing and go past that and be successful.
Edwina, I could never talk to you about nails, um, nor could I talk to you about hair. But you're right about the nonverbal language, and that's so critical. And if you want to talk about another stereotype or pattern, put it that way, that if you were to categorize men and women, women tend to pay better attention to the nonverbal language than men. Now, again, I've seen it on both sides of the spectrum. Given my background working in hospitals with patients, I learned to pay a lot of attention to that. But that's unusual. Uh, but nonverbal language is huge, and not being aware of it, that's one of those things where you talked about, excuse me, learning to get better at something. We should all learn about what our body language means. It doesn't mean we're all going to be experts. I'm certainly not, because we still do our natural things. But to understand what impact that has on people, or how it can be perceived, is hugely important.
Awesome. So we have a few minutes left. We want to talk about, we want to make sure we leave everyone with, how do I become a better communicator? How do I become a better ally of those who are working with me from a communication perspective? Let's leave everybody with those thoughts. Thank you for those of you who have joined us. Please share. If you watch this on the replay, please leave your comments and questions. We will monitor that and we'll get the questions to the right people, and we will respond to that. But we love the engagement here. It's been an awesome time. So let's round this conversation out with, how do we all help each other be the strongest and best communicators we can be, um, so that we can move our organizations along into the next place that we want them to be, where we're creating that culture that is going to allow everyone, and I mean that intentionally, everyone to thrive, everyone to be able to be successful.
I didn't want to be first. I've been first all night, but but anyways, I think, which has been stated, the best skill that we could bring to the table in communication is being a great listener. Before we uh, analyze and our preconceived thought, our preconceived idea, or before we move into processing everything, we've got to hear everything.
Yep.
And once we hear it in its totality, then I think we can have an understanding, and then we may be able to frame it so that we can have some attachments to it. I don't think it's a one one lane solution. I think it's like a branch, like a tree. You don't have one limb and call it a tree.
Hmm.
There are many limbs that branch off of that tree. And I think when we communicate, we need to open up all areas through the channel of listening, so that when it connects to that vine, even Jesus gave a scripture that He is the vine and we are the branches. And so we have to know that the branches feed off of the vine. So we have to have that one concept, that one idea, and let everybody feed off of that. And let's hear, listen to what's being said before we come up with a conclusion. And then from my perspective, let's lose the thing about the facade about uh, me, myself, and I, and it's my world, and it's going to go this way, or you can leave, or what. Let's open up. It has to be a willingness, and I use this word because we use it in marriage. There has to be a willingness to submit who you are, your identity, if you want to grow uh,
Hmm.
in the business world. You have to be willing to submit to other ideas. You have to be willing to submit to other, and not be intimidated by someone idea who may be better than yours because it didn't come from you. But because we're all connected, our our focus should always be to make the company, make the church, make the marriage, whatever it is, better. And so
Mm.
I think when you listen to all contributors, overall you can get a better understanding of the directives that you want for the business, the marriage, the church, whatever it might be.
Awesome. Before the next panelist shares, I want to share what Iris is saying. She says, I think it first needs to know ourselves and know our strengths and weaknesses in terms of communication to be able to be transparent in all we say, listen, and do. That is awesome because too often we lose our identity and it shows up in our communication. And people can tell it. We think we being slick or we think we're like, really making an impression, right? Because we're speaking exactly like that other person across the table or the person we think who is most influential. And everybody's like, they just sound like the leader. They just sound like, they just saying what the leader would say. And that's not what people want to say. We need to know our identity, bring our identity, strengths and weaknesses forward, and be transparent. So awesome. So thank you, Iris, for sharing that. Okay, who wants to share next around? What can we do? What can we do? What can we do?
I think it's I'll share next, I guess. Um, it's to have open-mindedness and be willing to change your paradigm. Just because you are the communicator or the listener or the leader or the pastor or whatever you are doesn't necessarily mean that you're always correct. And there's always room for growth and there's always room for improvement. But that doesn't happen if you're not open yourself to receive that feedback to say, hey, you need to learn to to listen a little bit better and not get offended. Constructive criticism is great because it constructs you, right? It's in the word. It builds you up. So having an open mind, especially in a world like today, that there's so many changes and so many different interactions with individuals, and they come from different backgrounds. They have different experiences in life. They have different ways of communication. They have different temperaments. So understanding all these elements and creating this intentional space will make you a better communicator. But you have to also, with your team, I do this with my team here. It's like, ask questions. Hey, how do you feel? How do you like to be heard? How do you like to be, how do you communicate? What are some elements that I should be aware of when I'm listening to your responses? Also, get to know them. You have a team, you're working with a team. That's cool. They're pushing the vision forward. That's amazing. But if you don't get to build that connection with your team, when you speak to them, either it's gonna go from one ear to the next, or they're not gonna really value your input because there's no kind of connectivity or connection with the vision. And create that space. I'm going back to that spot. It's like creating that space of awkwardness. It's okay. We trim down 5-10 minutes of our meeting of awkward silence to make sure that people who have been reserved, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should share or not. It kind of forces them to share and kind of forces them like to speak. And it's good because you can begin to listen to their feedback and their input, and as you validate them or as you receive that feedback or as you receive that comment or that idea, it moves them to a place of trust and confidence. It's like, you know what, I'm going to share this now. I got to share it last time. I had to wait until the awkward moment, but I'm going to share it now because my feedback was valued and my input was heard. So I think if we create that intentional space, it's great. And to echo what Pastor G was saying, also listen, listen, listen. There's a difference between listening and hearing. There's an attentiveness when you're listening and paying attention, right? When you're hearing, it's like, oh, okay, you're saying words and I'm not really connecting what you're saying to whatever I have to do. So be able to, as a leader and as the receiver, be able to listen and be intentional. As I speak for myself. When my wife speaks to me at times, I'm like, man, I have to come up with a solution as she's speaking to me because I need to fix this. And by nature, I'm a fixer. So I have to intentionally push back and say, I need to listen to what my wife has to say. And as Pastor G was saying, I don't need to come up with assumptions because once I open my mouth with my assumption, it's not what she was trying to say. So create that space and be still and listen. And then I'll finish with this. It's a scripture, I believe it's in James 1:19. It says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. And that there's so much wisdom and entangled in that simple verse that will make you successful, not just in ministry, but also corporately and in your personal life. So listen, ask question, and create those intentional spaces.
Awesome. So Robin Taylor says, yes, be willing to change And then Iris is appreciating this conversation. So, again, I would also want to thank you all. She's supporting her friend, Pastor Jesus. So, yes, thank you so, so, so very much. And Apostle Robin Taylor is obviously supporting her husband, as well
Mhm.
as Stacy, Pastor Stacy Barbara Bent is supporting her brother in love. So we are so grateful to everybody who's been watching and listening and chiming in. So, what say you, panelists, host? What else can we do? We've heard listen, we've heard open minded, be attentive. What else can we do?
So I would say most of the time when people think about communication, they think about it sharing. But to our point that we made all night, being a listener, and great listeners most of the time show great empathy. So Stephen Covey wrote a book several years ago. It's really old. I don't even know if Stephen Covey is still alive. But he talked about, David says he's dead. Okay. So he talks about seeking to understand versus seeking to be understood. Those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
When you're seeking to understand, you're listening, you're paying attention, and what happens when you do that is you're actually building pieces of your puzzle of the things that you know about. You're building that up as you're seeking to understand. And then what I would say too, going back to the culture as a female, if you know that you're in a male dominated environment, be succinct. What I mean by that is not the time to tell your story about what they had on and what it smelled like in the room or any of that. That's not. Get in, get
And
out.
get out. Mm-hmm.
That's it. And the other thing I'd say, going back to Pastor Jesus, is get comfortable with silence
Mm-hmm.
because it's okay.
It is very okay. Okay, David, what's your words of wisdom?
I'm still stuck on what did it smell like in the room. Uh,
He had
um,
this, he had on that.
so listening is huge. I know several of us have mentioned that. The other point about listening is be prepared to hear something you may not want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to accept it, not defend it right away. Because by that, that's the stereotypical person, gender neutral, who's waiting to argue whatever you're going to tell them. No, just listen to what I have to say, hear it, take it in, ask me some questions for clarification. Let me help you understand where I'm coming from, and then you'll better understand it. I think it's great to listen because we should listen a lot more than we do today. Um, but listening is also being prepared to hear something you may not want to hear and understand that person's perspective and ask more questions to understand. So, what makes you say that? Where are you coming from? And and tone of voice is huge. It's not, well, what made you say that? Well, right away, that puts the person on defensive posture. It's, tell me more about that. So I just want to understand where you're coming from. That's a very different message. Uh, so good conversation tonight.
Absolutely. I wanted to round that out. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And we were talking before we came live that there's different forms of communication too. So tonight we've been talking about the communication of sharing verbally, and all that comes with that physically. We know that a lot of people are communicating through texting and written communication. That's a whole nother broadcast. We're talking about when you're in the room, which I think could be potentially on the edge of becoming a lost art because we can be in the room and we're still doing this, right? So we want to make sure you know that will never go away. It will always be king when you're in the room and you're conversating and collaborating, building together. So hopefully we've left you with many, many things to think about and to to actually be able to use immediately when you get off of this broadcast. We have some final thoughts. Robin is saying, I love that. Iris is saying, totally agree. Silence leads us to meditation, and that helps us to process information we receive to communicate in a better way. Absolutely. Sometimes that that moment of silence allows you to get those emotions together. And maybe we'll do something on emotional intelligence, right? Because if I respond sometimes based on what I'm really feeling and how I received it, it may not go well. So we need to be able to rest in that silence, right? We want to thank our guests for being here. You have been awesome. I love the fact that we were able to also bring in the faith based in our conversation, leadership conversation this month. Because again, when we talk about culture, especially from a Destiny Speak perspective and leaderships, leaders should be strong leaders. I don't care if you're in corporate, if you're in faith-based organizations, if you're leading our community movement. We need leaders to be strong leaders to bring people along with them and not hurt people who are trying to help them build. So, we're going to round this out by asking and giving everybody an opportunity to tell us, what do you have coming up next that you'd like the people to know about, so that they can either participate in it or support you in it, or you just want us to know to be on the outlook for something that's happening your way. So, Jesus, you want to, is there anything that's happening?
Sure. So we're hosting a prayer gathering. I guess I can shout that out here. October 29th, 30th, and 31st at 1602 Allen Street in Springfield, Crossover Church, where we're gathering generation, the mothers and fathers, young folk and older folks together to pray and to impart words of encouragement as we're leading up to the end of this year. So you're more than welcome to come.
Awesome. I love that. Encouraging communication that we all need, right? And Pastor G.
Well, we don't have anything major coming up at this moment that I could think of. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but we do know that this is a season of Rosh Hashanah, and we've been doing some teaching on that with time of restoration and time of renewing and time of just really seeking the face of God for this year, Rosh Hashanah. And so Prophet Stacy Bent has been teaching on that through our Zoom Bible studies on Wednesday evenings. That has been a blessing and has opened up quite a few doors. And also that we continue to know that, that as we're in prayer, that we pray for the devastation in our own country, in Haiti and in the Caribbean and Louisiana and throughout our own country. There are people that are hurting, that are suffering. So we continue to be in prayer for them. And I just, as you were wrapping up, I thought in terms of this statement that hurting people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes we have to really assess those in leadership and determine if they're hurting. That if you are hurting because of past hurts, that you get help so
Mm-hmm.
that you won't lead another generation that are a volatile generation or that become volatile because of your own hurts. So that we pray that you will get help and that you'll be able to lead in love and lead with compassion and lead with empathy the generation that will follow. God bless you.
And David, what's coming up with you?
Well, after listening to those two gentlemen, I feel like I just went to church. So that's good.
You did.
Um, so I guess the earliest thing I have coming up is next Tuesday. So the Greater Norwich Area Chamber of Commerce has a workshop educational session that they do for new leaders and budding leaders, and I'm doing a session on organizational culture. So what it is, how what to what degree it's important, who's responsible for it, etc. All kinds of questions around that.
Absolutely. Culture is king. Edwina, you want to share
I am
anything from
still
you?
working on my dissertation. One day I'll be able to come and say I'm done with it, but I'm working on it.
Awesome, awesome. For those of you who don't know, I released an ebook called No Bosses Allowed, Lead to Serve and Transform. So that book is out there, available, but coming shortly within the next couple of weeks is an online course with actual practical application where you can take your unique situation and apply all 12 of those positions that I put in that book to your scenario, and hopefully you'll glean from that. And then we too have a program. Since we're speaking to people of faith, we Destiny Speak have a program that we have available that's called Realign, Reignite, and Run. And because there are people who have been out of sorts with what's happening, their own vision, they've kind of put it on the table and left it, said it's never going to happen when they look around to see all the things that have happened from the pandemic. So there's workshops, whether it be virtual or online, that we can bring to your group and work with you, and I'm sure that they will find that beneficial. So again, that's Realign, Reignite, and Run workshop, and you can find that on the Diplomat Chronicles, as well as I think it's on Destiny Speak website. So we just want to thank our guests for coming and for sharing. I want to make sure I'm not missing any comments. It's been very engaging. People have been here just chiming in. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us and for sharing your comments. Again, if you're watching this on the replay, leave your questions, leave your comments. We will see them. Share this, and then share it some more. We'll be back next month. We are here every second Thursday of the month with more leadership conversation. It is all organizations that are a part of this, David, Destiny Speak, and definitely it's our desire to strengthen leaders wherever they are. And we can do that by having very candid, very transparent conversation around what leadership looks like, should look like, and how we can help our people. So with that, we're going to say goodnight to everyone. Please be safe and continue to do what you do best. Have an awesome evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Good night.